Welcome to the Global Gaming Business Podcast, the industry's first and longest running podcast, now in our 16th year. I'm Roger Gross, the publisher of GGB, and this week we sit down with John Tahsuda, who has returned to Navigators Global after spending the last 4 years working for the Interior Department in the Trump administration. 20 years ago, IGT transformed the industry by introducing cashless gaming with Tito. Now IGT is revolutionizing cashless yet again. Learn more about IGT's resort wallet at igt.com/cashless. Welcome to the Global Gaming Business Podcast. We're here today with John Tahsuda. John just left his position at the Bureau of Indian Affairs under President Trump. And John, it's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time out of your day today.
Thanks, Roger. I'm really happy to talk to you.
You know, I was really glad to see that you were appointed when President Trump was there, because I've known you for a lot of years, and your expertise in tribal gaming and tribal government in general is second to none. So I was really pleased to see him take you on board. And why don't you give us a little bit of a background of what how you got there and what your position was like at BIA?
Sure. So. And let me make a small clarification there. I was not at the BIA. BIA is a bureau. I was in the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs Office, which oversees 3 Indian bureaus actually at the department. I had previous interactions, all very positive, with a few folks that were going over early in the Trump administration, and so I had some conversations with them over a few months, and a lot has happened since then, but in case people don't recall, the Trump administration came in, unlike most other administrations, without, most of the top folks did not have a big background in government. And so I think it's fair to say it got off to a little bit of a slow start. I don't think they necessarily understood the importance of getting political appointees into offices, et cetera, as swiftly as a team that had prior experience, with the federal government would have known. And so it took a while, but I had some conversations with those folks. Chief among them, was David Bernhardt, who was first the deputy secretary and then the secretary, and had a lot of interactions with David and guys like Jim Cason when they were there during the Bush administration, and I was working on the Hill at the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. Right. And a lot of that focused at the time, in fact, it consumed Interior at the time, the Cobell litigation. And so we worked jointly together on some proposals for settlement of that legislation. And I got to know them and really appreciated their sort of straightforward, honest way of looking at things. So when the turn came around, and I reached out to them, and they encouraged me, said that they'd like to have me, think about coming in. And one of the things that David said really struck me. Said, John, one thing you got to understand is that the decisions that are made at the department are really important to people in their daily lives. And what we do there actually has an impact and can be a very positive impact for people. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, I'd like to be part of something like that. And so, through my, there's a lot of paperwork you got to do to get hired, even on a political position with the federal government. But we'll do all that. And, you get your background check, find out things about yourself that you didn't know before. but it's all good though. Good. And in some ways, it restores your faith that that we're not unlikely to have some crazy joker actually get a position in the government. So anyway, that was the process. And when I first came in, I was appointed to the principal deputy assistant secretary at Indian Affairs. So each of the in Interior, each of the assistant secretary offices has a principal deputy. They often have, and it varies from the different offices, but they often have a couple of deputies, and usually they split the sort of operational side of an assistant secretary's office up into several deputies. Sure. But the principal deputy is really intended to be the sort of first lieutenant, or whatever you want to say, to the assistant secretary, and so has almost all of the authorities that the assistant secretary has so that in the absence of the assistant secretary, you can run that office, right, and have the oversight of the bureaus, et cetera, in case, as it took with this with the Trump administration, quite a while to get some of the assistant secretaries confirmed. And so, and there was other people in the other assistant secretary office that really ran them for well over a year, and until assistant secretaries could be confirmed to be in those spots. And so, I served as the principal deputy assistant secretary for about 2 years, and that was a great experience for me. Again, sort of on the operational side, learned things that I never knew. Fascinating to get an understanding of how the federal government administrates its responsibilities to every citizen, but particularly to Indian citizens of the country. And so that was a great experience for me. And there is a little more operational involvement by the Indian Affairs Assistant Secretary because the Indian bureaus do not have political leadership. So like the Bureau of Land Management, even the National Park Service, et cetera, they have leaders who are confirmed by the Senate. Well, we don't do that with the Indian bureaus, and probably with good reason, because you like to have leadership who can stay on there. It's very, very technical in the aspects of dealing with the tribes, right? So it's great to have solid, bureaucracy there who can stay regardless of the administration. So, but that means that there are some operational decisions that you want to have political decision-making part of. And so that means for Indian Affairs that that the Assistant Secretary's office has to necessarily be involved with those decisions. And so one really important part of that is the ultimate sign-off on budgets. And so, that was I came into the office just literally about 6 weeks before we had to submit our proposed budget for to the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. And so that was kind of trial by fire, or drinking from the water hose, whatever. I mean, because even for the Indian bureaus, the budgets are crazy. They're billions of dollars and very complicated, and going through them and trying to figure out why something was prioritized when another one wasn't. And of course, in this case, every one of these things that are prioritized or unprioritized have tribes that want them, and so you have tribes who are saying, why isn't my thing a priority? When another one is, and another tribe say, you can't stop that from being a priority. That's my So it's quite a process and a great learning experience, I have to say.
So I guess you get a lot of phone calls then during that period.
We got a lot of phone calls, and there was a lot of uncertainty early on from the tribes, I think, with the Trump administration. Again, not a lot of known political players. And so new people coming in and, unsure of how, they would react and stuff. So, but I thought we did a good job of kind of calming nerves and again, when you're talking dollars in a budget that's never enough to cover everything, obviously you can have some tense calls, right? But I thought we all came out of those, with an understanding, of where we were, and it was educational for me as well to kind of get a better sense of why some things in a certain tribal community, why something is more important there than it is in another tribal community. That's very, very helpful. So that was a great process. And like I said, I spent a little over 2 years down there. And then about the last year and a half, I worked actually directly with the secretary. When Secretary Bernhardt, was confirmed, he asked me to come up to his office and be a counselor there. And that's a wonderful experience. And for me, it gave me an opportunity to expand, sort of the scope of my vision beyond just the Indian Affairs portfolio, and to see what the other bureaus do and that interaction. And, it's a fun role, I have to say, in that position, because you're really kind of like a troubleshooter. And so, and sort of a traffic direct, cop going in both directions, both coming and going. And so, when the secretary calls and says, I had this idea, why don't you find out how quickly we can make this happen? You're the guy that calls down, and like with the secretary, you sort of have his carte blanche to call as far down as it needs to go. If it's all the way down to a park administrator, You get to call that guy. You don't have to go through the layers of administration to get to him. Right. You call right to him. And so, there's a certain freedom in that to let you really just make things happen quickly. That's a lot of fun. And then there's a lot of troubleshooting. Things are coming up. Either the secretary is saying, I asked for this 6 months ago. I haven't heard a peep about it. What's going on? Or people saying, look, we asked for this and we put money in the budget for it, and we can't get anybody at the national headquarters level to pay attention to it. Like, what's going on with that? And so you kind of, you really get to interact on both levels, or multiple levels. And so that was a great experience. And also, one of the things that was really important to me, and I brought with me when I moved up to the secretary's office, the land buyback program and the Office of the Special Trustee, which are legacies of the Cobell litigation and the Trust Fund Reform Act, and those were all things that were incredibly important and absorbed a huge amount of our time when I was at the Indian Affairs Committee. Right. And so while I was there, we were able to set in motion sort of the final couple of years of the buyback program and have a plan in place that would efficiently use all the remaining dollars, trying to accomplish, taking out the fractionated interest that was the goal of the buyback program. And at the same time, in all fairness, this was something that began during the Obama administration, because it's a long process. But the process of winding up the Office of the Special Trustee, and at this point in time, almost 30 years later, people have forgotten that was a temporary office to handle a special problem. And it was always envisioned that whatever came out of that, there would be some sort of permanent bureaucratic solution. Mm-hmm. And so being able to be part of the wrap up of that, including sending the final notice that we had accomplished all of the reforms needed, and laid out the plan and how we were and did create a new bureau, a third Indian Bureau, which would take all the functions of the special trustee and move it into a new bureau. And so making it a permanent part of the bureaucratic apparatus. Right. Okay. Which is incredibly important to tribes. And so that was, again, that's something that I was able to bring and accomplish there.
Well, that's interesting, because I see that this didn't really end. You just transferred it into a permanent bureau. So right, exactly. Government program that really actually ended, So,
right. Like all good government programs, right?
Right. So there's a perception out there now that the Trump administration was anti-Native American, and I think that some of that was just perception. I mean, Obama held these roundtables with tribes, and they were on CNN, they were on all the news networks, and they're covered very deeply. Trump held the same kind of meetings, but nobody ever covered it. Why do you think that was? Why do you think that they didn't get the recognition for working with tribes that the Obama administration got?
Well, so I think one way to look at it is that every administration sort of has their own MO on what they like to push into the national media. Right. And so, and the Trump administration was no different. So, they had things that they thought they really wanted to push their storyline in the national media. And, they didn't perceive, I think, that, that most of the tribal issues, there were some exceptions, right? The Operation Lady Justice and things that, that they really push hard. But I just don't know, there was, in my experience, I would say there was a desire by them to understand and look for pragmatic solutions. Mm-hmm. And so rather than sort of having a big show, they preferred to actually, have a meeting, hear what needs to be done, talk about what are some solutions, and then try to put that into action. Mm-hmm. That's just, obviously that's one way to go about it. I think the Obama administration, perceived, reasonable people can disagree whether it's effective or not, but perceived that, their best method was to kind of push these things, which they added to a collection of minority issues sort of out into the national media and let that be sort of part of the president's, bully pulpit, if you want to call it that. So, that was the way they did it. Trump administration had a different way. So I think, though, you can't ignore that, the media is not controlled by the government, right? Very happily for you, I think, right? And so what, regardless of what the White House may want to push, it's ultimately up to the media to for that aspect of it, anyways, to take it and run with it. And so, I thought, that, that was an unfortunate thing for whatever reason. There was a lot of attention on some aspects of what the president, put out in the national news, and they really, to the detriment, I think, of really good issues. The national media did not focus at all on things that didn't follow that sort of line they were paying attention to. And so, I think we had, so speaking specifically for us as a department, I think that we worked hard to sort of counteract that by really focusing on local media. I'd like to think that in the tribal context, that's just as effective as national media. And so at the local level, we worked really, and I say we, I don't want to take credit for it, but our communications group worked closely with us, though, and we helped them identify tribal media outlets, right? And then a lot of states that have tribes, the local media outlets, the state media outlets, that did pay attention to those issues in their state, and worked pretty hard to try to get the information out through them. So at the end of the day, I think, at least from the tribal perspective, I think that does them better, right? That they get and see more local news than they do from the national media.
Right, no question. So there's undoubtedly a long list of accomplishments under the Trump administration in Indian country. That came through your department. What are you most proud of that you've seen under the Trump administration? And that can be, it doesn't necessarily have to be Indian as well, since you had operations in other areas, and there's a lot of areas of interior people don't realize. The national parks, the energy thing, the Bureau of Land Management. There's all kinds of things under interior. So if you want to include that, that's good too.
Sure. And that's great, because there is a couple of things that are sort of carry Indian issues in the orbit, but we're kind of outside of
right.
At least outside of the tribal bureaus, et cetera. Particularly while I was down in the assistant secretary's office, I would say a big focus that I had coming in was on law enforcement, frankly. I have a number of family members that serve in tribal law enforcement or local law enforcement that are in and around tribal communities. And I asked a lot of questions when I came in to the department, and it seemed to me like that the tribal law enforcement and the Bureau of Police, had really not had, to my opinion, this is my opinion, right, but had not had the attention that they really deserved. Mm-hmm. And so I made it a point to, we had a lot of discussions about personnel and how to improve, morale, personnel issues. There were things that were allowed to happen at local levels, and that are not good for any organization, nepotism and things, and so those are some practical things. But when you have, when you have some attention and from the top, it certainly encourages leadership then to take action. Right. So that was good. And then I also, again, sort of in your prerogative and looking at reviewing budgets and setting some priorities, I made law enforcement a priority. There's not a lot of spare money in the tribal budgets and in the BIA budget, but I scrounged around and we put new resources and extra resources, and then that was in the first budget cycle, which really is not your own. You're kind of dealing with what you're left with. Sure. But in the subsequent budget cycles, we were able to ask for, and I think, I don't think, particularly in the law enforcement context, I don't think that the OMB office under President Trump denied us anything we asked for on law enforcement, and they were very supportive. And so that was a big, a big thing. The other, and part of that, which was really important, and it was really a department-wide effort, but the BIA police are sort of the tip of the spear on this, was the opioid task force that we had at Interior. And right up until the pandemic, which of course, you can't do these sort of intensive programs when a reservation is shut down, right? But up to there, we really had some eye-popping numbers. And to be honest, it didn't take that much more money. Mm-hmm. It just took some focus. Yeah. And there are plenty of officers who were happy to fill in and do this. Tons of reservations, tribal leaders that asked us to come in and do these. and help, even when they have their own police, right? And we would send in a task force and work with, and part of the task force is to work with not just the BIA police or other department law enforcement, but also local law enforcement. Right. And even the FBI sometimes. And then when we're down on the southern border, we have actually not known by a lot of people, but the BIA police have a great relationship with the border agencies, all of them, Border Patrol and others. And so for those reservations down on the southern border, they have great relationships and they work really well together. And so, but again, we had some eye-popping numbers on arrests and, the amount of drugs and stuff confiscated. It is kind of a sad fact to think, though, that, that's still going on. And, in some ways, you're just making a dent in a problem. And there's so much more that could be done. But anyway, that was, that was sort of personally important to me in a way. But I think it was, to my mind, I thought it was really important and a great thing that we were able to do. And so I think that, again, sort of like with the law enforcement, my observation coming in that there were a number of things that just needed a little more attention from a political level. Right. And so one of the things that we took on, and I want to say when Tara Sweeney got confirmed and came in as assistant secretary, she jumped in with both feet. And something incredibly important to both of us and all of us, actually, Mark Cruz, who was one of the other Indian Affairs deputies, had been a teacher earlier in his life. And so the education of Indian kids, hugely important, very important in all of our lives. And, they previously had been the Office of Indian Education, had been split off a long time ago into the Bureau of Indian Education. But it was a bureau in name only. It had none of its own sort of administrative backbone. They depended on the BIA to provide all the basic services, including janitorial and all the, repairs. And so, so when a school had let's say a pipe burst, the school administrator had to call the local BIA agent and say, do you have a guy and does he have time to come over and help us, get the toilets working again in our school, right? And if the BIA agent said, I'm sorry, he's over somewhere else, doing, they just got to wait, And so we built out the backbone for that agency. And, it's, again, takes a few years to get these things fully implemented, but they are well on their way, completely separated out the budgets. And so, and so I take great pride in the fact I think we really did build out a backbone for something that's incredibly important to 70,000 Indian kids around the country. And so I hope that's a legacy that people remember us for as well.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about tribal government gaming. Obviously, it thrived under the Trump administration, and to be fair, it thrived under all presidents before that. But do you think a lot of that was due, however, to the pro-business attitude that the Trump administration brought in?
Well, certainly, I think we had a desire to promote economic development on the reservation. And, this was a president who just across the board, across the country, had a desire to promote business and really improve the economic lives of people. And so, but, from the earliest days that I was involved, there was a great interest and great reception, to take, everybody knows, and even if you don't, it doesn't take very long to learn that Indian country is the worst off economically anywhere in the country. Right. And so, even the fellows who, hadn't really been involved in government before and everything, right, you present them a few facts and figures that are pretty easy to come by, and they're like, wow, and so we had great support. Virtually every big economic idea, that the White House had, they would ask us, how can we use this to benefit Indian country? And there are, it's a challenge. They were very receptive and wanted to know how, larger programs. It's a challenge in Indian country because certain things about lending and whatnot and tax credits and hard to apply to Indian country sometimes, but they really worked with us on those. And so there was a general support for that. And then I found it kind of interesting, but I came to understand, and it was great, that this was administration, unlike every other administration I had ever been involved with or known or had a contact with. This is administration that had no hesitancy about the positive aspects of gaming.
Right.
And when I say previous administration, I mean Democratic and Republican.
Sure.
There's always been some hand wringing about it, and President Trump had no qualms about it, right? He knew it could be successful businesses, and so they were, fully supportive, and I think that that certainly left it into our hands, which want to take some credit for. I think we were able to then take the time to implement some process improvements. You don't want to try to fix something that's not broke, right? Any game working well, but among the complaints that I had heard all the way back to when I was in the Senate and stuff, were about how long it takes for decisions to be made and whatnot. And these have real world consequences. Time is money, right? And it can impact lending decisions and things. So we did kind of really kind of focus in on some process improvements. The one of the things we did was to pull up land decisions that have to do with gaming up to the central office, so we could make them a priority and try to get them done. I think there's a sort of a false perception in Indian country that if it stays at the regional level, then they can make it happen faster. And in my experience, that's not actually what happens. And so we were able to do that. And then as part of the department's look at its environmental review process and the immense amount of time and money it was taking for decisions to get approved, we pulled in those decisions as well. And a long time ago, it's probably not necessary that every gaming land decision have a full environmental review, but as sort of protection against litigation, et cetera, years and years ago, the department decided we're just going to run every one of those through the environmental review ringer.
Right.
So fair enough. But that meant, though, that we were able to pull those in. And so the sort of time limitations and making paperwork get submitted, putting some limitations on, what goes into the review as far as the bulk of paper. And believe it or not, the bulk of paper seems to have an impact on the time it takes. And so anyways, just some simple things like that. But I think, and the proof is in the pudding. We got a surprising number of decisions done, I think. Surprised some folks, and some what are often difficult decisions, like two-part determinations by improvements in the process. And then taking a fair and hard look at it, no politics, fair and hard look at the decision and putting it out there. I mean, the real decision is in the hands of the tribes and the states in those situations, right? But turning around our part and putting it back on them and letting them take care of their business, So I think, if you want to ask about accomplishments too, I think that's a positive one that we were able to do.
Yeah, no question. So, I've interviewed, I think every chairman of the National Indian Gaming Commission since the beginning. And I always talk to them about their relationship with Interior, and I understand it's a separate agency. There's really no oversight, but they're still linked together. So give us a viewpoint of how Interior and the NIGC coexist at that level.
Well, I would take us a step back and say they're not unconnected.
Right.
NIGC is actually a component, but a semi-independent component of Interior. Right. It's a little bit of an odd situation, although there are other agency and regulatory agencies that have a sort of similar semi-independent status. But I think it works in this situation pretty well because you have these basic decisions about land, which have a big practical impact, on a gaming project, and that process is kind of split between Interior and NIGC, and so you want to have a consistency of decision. Sure. For the tribe, right? I mean, frankly, and so they're connected, and they need to be connected to a certain degree at that level. Right. The thing that they really need to be in the commission, I'm saying, they really need independence on is the regulatory aspect. Right. And I think that for quite a well, as long as I've known, I think that the agency through different administrations has really been allowed to have a free hand at it's exercising its regulatory responsibilities, and it's allowed it to grow into a strong and positive agency. And so that was one thing that we really drew kind of a bright line at, was to say, if that's a regulatory decision,
Right.
You have 3 commissioners and a general counsel over there.
Sure.
They have the experience on those, and that should be their call, not ours.
Yeah.
Now, land decisions, the department has a lot of experience in land and land decisions, and including gaming decisions. So we ought to talk about those, right? There ought to be a connection to make a common decision. So I think it was a good relationship we had.
Mhm.
There was a holdover chairman from the Obama administration, and I think that probably the best thing you can say about a regulatory agency is there seemed to be no major headlines, right? I think they did their job. They kind of, they were, and since there weren't any sort of major catastrophes, they were able to stay in the background and just do their job, and everybody's happy when it's like that, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and you and I know from previous administrations that isn't always the case.
Right.
So yeah, keep them quiet. Keep them out of the controversy. Things look good.
Yes. Yeah.
So another thing that Interior gets involved with is the compacts between the tribes and the states. Now that you're on the inside, what is your perception of that procedure?
It's a challenging process. For Interior, it's not particularly complicated, but there's a lot of business and political, sort of factors that are flying back and forth between the tribe and the state, and you're kind of put in the middle of that, right? But I think that the timelines, the other complicating factors, the timelines are very short.
Right.
And IGRA itself, it's pretty clear that there are very limited circumstances that the department can deny approval of a compact, and so that makes it the short time frame and a short and sort of a limited authority to act makes it a challenge. It's helpful that the department has regulations in place that address some of the things that you could otherwise get caught up on, and so. Things like, making sure that you have the proper official approving the compact, right? So particularly for a state, there's a different state to state, right? Some let the governor do it, and some of them have a lower level official, but they generally have some action they point to by the legislature, somebody appointing this person to represent the state.
Right.
But the state has to step forward and show that, and that makes it easier on the department. And making sure that everybody's on board. And so, because, the one thing you don't want to do is kind of be embarrassed by approving a decision and then find out later, oh, well, it shouldn't have been approved. Or the wrong guy signed it, or,
right.
And again, the short time frame is a challenge. You are responsible for making sure that there aren't any of the reasons there that you would need to deny it. And so I have to say the solicitor's office at Interior and the gaming office do a pretty good job of getting through this, reviewing them, flagging, putting red flags on things and helping you work through them as quickly as possible.
I think this was under the Trump administration, but the compact between the state of Oklahoma and the tribes expired, and then the governor made a compact with 2 tribes where he allowed them to do sports betting with that.
Right.
And I believe that got rejected. Am I correct with that?
There is an out that IGRA gives you, in which it's unclear, right? Whether there's a gray area between whether state law, because state law is written into IGRA, a federal law, right? At a certain point, maybe federal law crosses the state law crosses the line, and it maybe violates the federal law, and so that's one of the things you have to look for. In that situation, it wasn't entirely clear to us about the other, the other gaming aspects of it, right? And so, we let those compacts go through by operational law, which means the secretary doesn't actually make a positive decision, but it's approved by operation of law. But it's only to the extent that it's consistent with federal law, including IGRA, which allows the opportunity, for folks to challenge it later.
Sure.
Say, well, that did violate federal law. And so it's you have to say, going back to challenges and reviewing the compacts, it is a difficult thing, because really a compact is between a tribe and the state, and not the other tribes who may object to it. Right. And you're kind of caught in a bad spot, right? And so if it's not clear on what the federal law is, it's really difficult, to my mind, to go out there and tell a tribe, no, we don't think you should have that compact. I'm not clear whether you can or can't. I'm just telling you, I don't think it's a good idea.
Right.
Well, I personally feel like that's not the right position to be in. If a tribe and a state, have negotiated in good faith and come to an agreement, I think, unless it clearly violates the law,
right.
We ought to honor that.
So another important thing that the Interior Department does is the granting of federal recognition to tribes. Under the Obama administration, I believe they only approved 5 tribal recognitions in 7 years and in 8 years, and Trump did 7 in 4 years. So what is that process like?
Well, it's a very challenging process. In fact, it probably makes gaming, if you get down into the weeds, it makes gaming look simple. Yes. The administrative procedure at Interior is very rigorous, as it should be. It's built to withstand litigation. There's been, tons of litigation over these decisions over the years. And so the department is very careful and builds strong records to defend their decisions. And so, but in part because of that, but in part also because of the limitations that the administration has to act versus the Congress, it can be a challenge for a tribal group to get through that. And so there are limits really on how far the administration can go to sort of legitimately recognize a group based on the regulations and the process that the department has. And so obviously Congress has greater latitude to do that. So there are tribes, and even going through the administrative recognition process, you often find that the Office of Federal Acknowledgement will say, we find many positive aspects that point to this being a tribal group worthy of recognition, but they fail some technical aspects. And so, we leave it to Congress, because Congress can ignore those, right? And so I think that's, the Virginia tribes, right? A good example of that. And so, some of them probably could have made it through, but some of them would have had a hard time. There's a lot of records, personal records and stuff that people have to be able to come up with. And in some states, those records were destroyed, right? So it's just impossible to sort of overcome that, administrative burden for a petitioner. And so in this case, fortunately, Congress, and I have to say, with great support from the state of Virginia, from every level, the state supported them. And so that makes it kind of easy for Congress to do that. So that's great. And, I think, there are other cases that come up from time to time. The Lumbee Trial is a good one, right? Kind of the same situation, I think, in which, they have a hard time going back historically, kind of like the Virginia tribes did, and for some of the same reasons, right? You have, destruction of records, you have, things that happen, and it makes it pretty hard for the agency to build the record that it needs to build to defend a decision. And so, but, Congress can act, and so, maybe that's a situation in which Congress could take it upon itself to say, we're pretty sure this is a group of Indians. They may not pass the test that Interior has to put them through, but we're willing to pass them.
Okay, great. So, this brings us to the issue of tribal sovereignty. This is always the cornerstone between the relations, the government-to-government relations between the tribes and the federal government. Do you believe that relationship was strengthened or weakened under the Trump administration?
Well, I think it was strengthened. I feel pretty strongly too on several bases. The root of it too is again sort of our approach being pragmatic, I think, and looking at what are real problems and looking to provide some solutions. And so there's a certain part of it that you want to hear from the tribes, right? And that's the consultation process, and some folks make more headlines out of it than others. But everybody agrees that it's a good process, right, to hear and to understand, because if you don't really understand what the problem is from the people affected, then how are you going to get a good solution, right? So in 2 years as the PDAS, the principal deputies, I think I personally ran over 24 consultations.
Yeah.
So I don't think anybody can say that we didn't have enough consultations. And some of those were over some pretty important topics, like should we make changes to the land trust process?
Sure.
And we ultimately, found that we didn't have reasons that answered any of the concerns the tribes had.
Yeah.
And so, that was a proposal that was shelved, right? Things like the reorganization of the department, we listened to the tribes, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs was not part of that reorganization, although we did, I in fact, part of my role with the secretary was working with those new regional offices and the special assistants, that were organizing them, to make sure that the Bureau folks who stayed in their own regions didn't have to change their regions, but they were still very much made a part of that decision making at the regional level for those new regions. And so I think that that was something pragmatic that we did. I think there were other things that I would say one of the things that we really kind of built on from prior administrations is the notion of tribal decision making. It's really important to me, right? And that's something that folks, even if they don't have a long background in tribal, sort of tribal issues, can understand. Hey, the local folks probably had the best idea on how to answer these questions, right? And so, everything from energy decisions, we pushed those down. We had the advantage of having some updates to the tribal, energy laws, and had a number of consultations on those, and really, the notion being that we want to turn the decision making over to the tribes. If you have energy resources, right, you should be the one making those decisions, not us. And as much as possible, too, environmental decisions, particularly, on things like that, right? Energy decisions. Maybe the tribe is the one that knows best on, how to do it, right? And not somebody in Washington, D.C., right? And so I thought we really moved the ball forward on things like that, and I hope those hold.
Yeah.
So I think, but again, the headline for me was tribal decision making.
Let's move forward here into the new administration. For the first time in history, the Native American Deb Haaland, who was appointed as a Secretary of the Interior, of course, which has huge influence over the tribes. What is this? What kind of a reaction have you heard from tribal governments about this appointment?
Well, they're obviously very excited, right?
Sure.
For the first time, and that's great. I think that what will be important and what will be telling is whether she can turn that energy that she has and that the tribes have and spread it through the department, right? And from the tribal perspective, spread it in a way that positively affects tribal decisions. Because again, the Indian bureaus aren't the only ones that make tribal decisions, right? Or decisions that affect tribal communities. And so that will be, I think, the real sort of test, right? With her at the helm, I'm sure there will be a greater effort to take in tribal views and whatnot, particularly again by the other non-Indian bureaus and whatnot. But really, do they turn that into actual decisions, right? That are impacted by those views, and that will be. That'll be a real question. Like I said, I thought we made some headway with the reorganization and the special field special assistants, and really bringing the bureau, especially the bureau regional leadership, into that decision making and making them part of it. I hope that holds. I think that having the other bureaus pay attention. And then put it into action is the real question, and we'll find out where the rubber hits the road. Because, like the National Park Service, and some of these, they have long histories of seeing and doing things the way they want to do them.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you affect that or not? That will be the real question.
But do you think the fact that she actually led her tribe's gaming enterprise for a few years will also give her a sensitivity to that kind of aspect of tribal government gaming?
I'm not sure. I hope so.
Yeah.
Again, my view on this in many aspects is really to stay out of the way. That's the best in general that the department can do. I mean, you have you had some land decisions to make, but
Right.
unless there's a real hiccup, and it should really just be an administrative process of getting through the environmental reviews and
Right.
making sure that it meets whatever legal tests are necessary, and but not to sort of independently shove yourself into the decision making. That's really for the tribe, right?
Right. Right. Great. Yeah. So she's appointed a few important positions for Native Americans in her department, but of course, not the first time that Native Americans have held important positions in the interior, and you're an example of that. How will this be perceived, do you think, in Indian country?
Well, I think again, I think that they'd be excited about it. It's interesting. One of the things that I was educated on is I had assumed that the tribal leadership in general sort of knew the other things,
right.
and the other bureaus that were operating in their area had responsibilities in their geographic region, and thought it was true. Some regions of the country are very much involved with the other bureaus, the other DOI bureaus, and some parts of the country are not. And so again, I think this kind of relates back to the notion of it's great to put these people in these positions, but are they going to be able to do something with it?
Right.
Something positive for the tribes, and I hope that's the case,
right.
And that they're able to do that. Certainly, it certainly provides that opportunity.
Right. And one of the areas that is not specifically Indian related, but it's the energy extraction from federal lands, that they've now put a moratorium on that. And how does this impact some of the tribes that are involved in that? I know the Navajos have a big role in that. The Hopi, right. And some of the other tribes on the plains there as well.
Right. So that's a really good question. I think smartly, it sounds like that they or walk that back from, at least specifically from energy extraction on tribal lands and individual Indian lands. And that would have been a poor decision on their part, frankly. The department, the federal government, has a responsibility to help a tribe or an individual Indian to get value out of its land if they want to do that, right? And you can't just arbitrarily say, I'm not going to let you do it. And so that would have been sort of a black eye. I'm sure there have been litigation quick to follow, and they probably understood that pretty quickly, walked that back. There's sort of two ways, though, that a larger federal lands moratorium impacts the tribes. And so the first, relates back to tribal and individual Indian land ownership and their ability to get, value out of the energy resources. So tribal lands don't exist in a vacuum, and individual Indian allotments, they're often, very often, around or within larger federal land holdings by BLM or particularly BLM being one, right? So the auctions that happen for the leases for those federal lands, which is generally mostly what the federal government makes a good chunk of money off of. The value of those leases go up significantly whenever a bidder can string together larger and larger chunks, right? Because then it becomes more cost effective for them. And so they're willing to bid higher on each individual piece. If they can only get one or two properties, then it's very cost ineffective, and you're liable to get no people bidding. Or if you do, you'll get a very small operator who is not going to pay you anything for it, really, right? And so, again, being part of a larger federal land holding, tribal lands, individual Indian lands benefit whenever they're able to be, kind of included in these larger leasing auctions on federal lands. And if you exclude that part, that devalues the auction of the tribal land. So that's can be a very negative impact on tribes and individual Indians. That's an important thing. I hope that people think about. The other thing, though, that is newer, and but is really important. The Great American Outdoors Act has a provision which provides a portion of the funding from federal energy extraction on federal lands to things like the national parks, Fish and Wildlife Refuge, and Indian schools.
Right.
right? Indian schools, again, I can't harp on it enough, right? It's incredibly important. The infrastructure backlog is immense. We still have kids who are being educated in 100-year-old buildings, right?
Absolutely.
And so this was an opportunity. And, for better or for worse, the administration does not actually get to have the last say in how much money goes to building schools, right? No matter how much you want to put in your budget, Congress is the one that writes that, right? And Congress has never put enough money to make a dent in the infrastructure backlog on Indian schools. Mm-hmm. Well, this was the way to do it. And so a big chunk of money from that fund goes towards building Indian schools and repairing and replacing, schools. And so if you cut off leasing from federal lands, there's all that money that would have, put in some new schools or rebuilt schools that just goes away. And so that's could be, again, a very negative impact.
Yeah. That's a detail I wasn't aware of. Thanks for bringing that up. So there's been some backlash toward government officials who served under the Trump administration. Have you experienced any of that at this point?
I have not, but I have to say, I was at a level of appointment. I have some pretty strong ethical restrictions that limit my interactions, and so maybe I haven't had the opportunity yet. But I would say, I think that's often overblown a bit. Yeah. And I would hope, anyways, that that any backlash would not happen or would not be tolerated by tribal leaders, because it's really important to tribes that, regardless of the administration, that you have, Indian folks, professional backgrounds who are willing to go in and work in that administration without fear of reprisal, right? I mean, that doesn't do anybody any good. So I hope that people think about that if they're sort of silly enough to think about it. I kind of think that stuff is childish, juvenile anyways, but
it's all political, and we hate politics. So what are you up to now? What's your next challenge coming up?
I am returning to the firm I was with before I left and went to the department. It's called Navigators Global. Mm-hmm. It's a small DC boutique firm, and but we represented a number of tribes. When I left, I thought we had built up a pretty good little practice, and I want to go back there, and hopefully there'll be some more tribes that are interested in what I've learned, and in addition to expanding sort of my base of knowledge from before, and I would love to work with more tribes in doing that.
Great. So we will put your contact information in the explanation for this podcast, so people can contact you. And just one last question. In the beginning, you said one of the reasons you got into this federal level of position was because you were convinced that it would impact individual people's lives. Do you really think that that's what you were able to do during your time in the Trump administration?
I do, on virtually every issue. Like I said, law enforcement issues, incredibly important. Schools, we visited tons of schools and seen kids, working in these conditions. And then I've been to some of the new schools that have been built, and it's amazing and incredible to see. So, I think, incredible impact.
Great. Well, John, thanks for taking the time to join us, and good luck in your future endeavors. And you always have a platform here if you want to talk or write something for us. We'll be glad to include it in our publications.
Well, I appreciate it, Roger. You've been a good friend over the years, and I really appreciate it.
Great. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks.
Hope you enjoyed this week's podcast, brought to you by IGT. Your players will experience the convenience of digital transactions throughout your resort property with IGT's Resort Wallet. Learn more at IGT.com/cashless. To learn more about the federal role in tribal gaming, visit GGBmagazine.com. And don't miss our annual Tribal Government Gaming magazine, which will be available in early June and distributed at the Indian Gaming Trade Show in July. To get all the news of the gaming industry, including daily updates, subscribe for free at ggbnews.com by using the code GGB180. Don't miss a single episode of the podcast. Subscribe on iTunes or Spotify today. So we'll see you next time on the GGB Podcast.